voiceovers for the channel. And if you like this kind of whispered content, please hit the like button or the thumbs up button. And if you feel so inclined, please leave a comment. So let's just begin. White Christmas. Living in lower Alabama, we rarely receive snow. I spent most of my life wishing for a white Christmas. A white Christmas that never came. I have only seen snow twice in my 33 years here. I always wanted to share that with my two boys. I knew that they would love to play in it. Build a snowman, have a snowball fight, all the things I never got to do. I found myself staring out of my window at the mounds of that icy precipitation surrounding my home, regretting every single wish I had ever made for a white, snow-covered Christmas. See, when I think about it, it all really started in the summer. Our summers are always freaking hot and extremely humid, but that year it was even more unbearably hot. We steadily saw temperatures of well over 100 degrees, and everyone I knew begged for relief. The heat wave lasted all the way until the week before Halloween. Then, suddenly a massive hurricane spawned in the Gulf of Mexico. The weather forecaster for our local news station frequently referred to as it is a monster. Looking back, I would believe it was more of a demon, not a monster. A demon that brought hell with it, but a much different one that I had read about in the Bible. The storm passed, leaving devastation for miles around. This hurricane affected every state within the southeast region of the United States. It affected Florida most of all. Help was sent from various utility companies, government aid agencies, and even regular citizens came to help with relief. And when I say various, I mean from every state in our region. Actually, this was amazing to see the effort put forth to help the people that had lost everything. I'm sure a lot of us thought that was the worst it could possibly get. I wish that I had not been so wrong, so very wrong. But see, this is when the rain started. And as November came, we felt the first droplets in our tiny town. It was an odd occurrence, but not odd enough to raise any eyebrows. I mean, it was just rain. How bad could a couple days of rain be, right? The problem came when days turned into weeks, and low-lying areas became flooded. Homes and towns nearby were washed away in a matter of hours once the levees broke. My wife Susan constantly thanked God that our house was nestled on a high elevation among trees. I found myself thinking the same thing, but actually I thought God had nothing to do with that, or what happened. No God I could ever believe in anyway. The week of Thanksgiving, the rain finally subsided. I'm sure that was something everyone would say they were thankful for. But the problem was, what remained was the cold. That in itself was not strange, but the severity of the temperature was. The temperatures were close to freezing for the following week. That was something we rarely saw until late January or early February even. My oldest son, Jacob, began singing that silly song by Bing Crosby. My wife beamed at the thought of them seeing snow on Christmas Day. The foolish child in me felt the same. The boys will finally get to see snowball, Susan squealed. I know, I can't wait to see Tommy waddling in it. I responded, those words ring in my head even now. I have to fight back tears when I think of just how stupid I had been. When we were so preoccupied with setting up decorations and buying presents that we were oblivious to what was happening all around us. The snow actually started falling the first week of December. The snow was up several inches within the first day. Amazing to see how beautiful and white and fluffy and just, it was so pristine. Of course, this was amazing to see at first, but when it kept coming and coming and coming, some people began to become worried. If you have never been in the South when it snows, you probably would not understand. You see, we are not prepared for that kind of weather. Everything shuts down. People stay home and rarely go out driving. I know it sounds ridiculous to anyone else, but that's what happens here. The snow just kept coming. My wife and I left the boys play in the fresh powder originally, but when it had gotten so high that I could barely walk in it freely, we decided it was best to keep them indoors. Hardware stores had started bringing in snow shovels to help clear pathways, something that you rarely found in our town. I bought one of the last ones on the shelf as people scrambled to manage the icy foreign invader. The situation seemed to become worse as small flurries became near blizzards. My wife stayed glued to the news and weather broadcast. It appeared the northern states had almost been buried in the frigid powder. The president had actually issued a state of emergency urging people in the north portion to evacuate to the south. This is when I started to actually be concerned. These people had been told to come south, but our situation was hardly any better. The weatherman stopped trying to be accurate. His predictions of an end to the madness never came. The temperatures continued to drop, and it was not long before we just saw them go from 0 to negative digits. It was unheard of in my state for it to be that cold, and people were getting afraid. Plumbing fixtures began to burst from frozen pipes, and people were left without water until they could actually thaw. Our world had become a freezer in a few weeks, and none of us were prepared for it. My family found themselves wearing our thickest clothing even inside our home. It felt like no matter how high I set the thermostat, it was not enough. Looking back, we should have left it then. By Christmas, we had no power. Utility companies had stopped trying to traverse the harsh conditions to repair down lines. Local officials had abandoned emergency protocols to save themselves. We began hearing rumors of our neighbors attempting to head further south to Florida. Susan suggested the same, but I reminded her of the destruction still left from the hurricane. I was afraid we would be worse off without shelter. So I made the decision to hunker down in our home. I cleared a path to the fireplace that had only been used for decoration and set to the task of getting a fire going. If it was not such a dire situation, my wife would have found amusement in me attempting something like that. I had never even seen someone use a fireplace, let alone light one. After several attempts, we were able to burn what little wood that was readily available near our home. My family and I huddled around it as if it were going to save us from the fate that waited outside. The whiteness had engulfed our home. The mounds had risen above the windows, breaking some of them. I was forced to reinforce each one to keep the cold out. We sealed every crack and crevice that could possibly let out the heat and tried to remain together. My wife wrapped our children in blankets and pulled them close. The boys did not understand. We were afraid to tell them how serious the situation actually was. The fear that rested on my wife's face was enough to keep me from ruining what could be our last Christmas. We still attempted to have a big dinner despite our ability to effectively cook. I also learned how to cook within a fireplace for the first time. It would have been an interesting experiment if it had not been essential for our survival at the time. We gave up on the idea of turkey or ham, but we had always had a decent stock of canned food. Habit I had picked up from my grandparents. I often wondered how they were faring during all of this, but I had my immediate family to worry about. Our world had been plunged into an endless sea of white. I even had nightmares of the stuff that Christmas Eve. My children normally woke me early on Christmas morning, but when my eyes fluttered open, I assumed it was still night. The house was so dark that I could barely see my wife lying next to me. I slowly rose from my bed, still completely clothed, and nudged Susan awake. The house had become far colder than it should have been, and I immediately headed for the fireplace. The fire had gone out at some point in the night. I ran for the back door, pulling on my boots, but my aim was to gather more wood to get the fire going again. But as soon as the door cracked open, I was pelted with a mixture of snow and ice. Stung my face. I cursed at the door while trying to shut it again. Our home had been buried in the vicious powder. I finally understood why no light permeated the windows. My watch read 9 o'clock, but it felt much earlier. Susan stumbled into the living room, asking what I was doing. I told her what time it was, and confused filled her eyes. She went for the window and was greeted with what I already knew. I do not remember ever seeing her quite so afraid, and the feeling was definitely mutual. I buried my enormous feelings of anxiety and pain and terror down as far as it would go. I was joking on them, knowing I had to be strong for my family. I told her to go check on the kids while I tried to get the fire going again. She disappeared down the hall, and I made my way to the dining room. The table and chairs had been passed down through my family for generations, but I knew it would have to be sacrificed. I set to dismantling the wooden chairs first, but was stopped by the sound of my wife's scream. I rushed through the hall, listening to the awful sound echoing in my ears. I could feel fear fuming in my eyes, but I pushed them back as I rounded the corner. She was grasping the door frame of our children's room. We had put them together so that Jacob could help keep an eye on Tommy. I noticed her body shaking as she stared into the room. Tears rolled down her cheeks as I turned to see inside. The window of their room had given to the weight of our captor. Despite my attempt at strengthening it, snow had buried the boys in the night. And that was when I noticed the flakes of white all over my wife's hand. Susan had attempted to uncover them. I could see the pale blue skin of their faces huddled together in Jacob's bed. It would have been a sweet scene if it were not for the color of their skin. Something Susan would have taken a picture of, but this was not that scene. I pulled Susan away as I tried to hold back the sick feeling in my stomach. I felt as though I could release what little Christmas dinner I had in me on the floor at any moment. Soon her sobs subsided, but when I looked into her eyes, she simply looked numb. I had never seen her this way. I tried to break her from the trance she seemed to be in, but she had nothing. Her eyes would not even turn my direction when I spoke. Something had broken inside Susan that morning, and I do not blame her. I sat her next to the fireplace and wrapped her in a blanket while I returned to the dining room. The polished wood did not want to burn, but I was determined to give us warmth. I did not stop until we had fire. I made it a point to ask Susan to stay by the fire while I returned to the boys' room. I could not leave them there that way, but when I reached the door, I found myself pausing just outside. I felt the warm and salty specks across my cheeks before I even saw them. I slowly stepped inside and slid gloves over my hands. I finished clearing away the snow and noticed why they had not simply come to our room. The wood I had used to seal off the window had struck my eldest first. It left a gash near his temple that would have knocked a grown man unconscious. I could only imagine his 10-year-old body had not lasted long after. Tommy had obviously woken after his tiny form to his brother like a teddy bear, clinging to his brother like a big teddy bear. I had internally cursed myself for not putting them to bed with us that night. I knew it was too late for that kind of thinking. I removed their bodies and wrapped them in blankets before placing them in the guest room. I took one final look at their tiny bedroom, a place that had held so much joy previously. I imagined the two of them playing and sometimes bickering. My lips tried to curl upward, but they just could not. My eyes drooped to the floor as I turned away and shut the door. I have not returned to that room since, and I doubt I ever will. I just returned to the living room in hopes of confronting Susan, but when I got there, the blanket was all that remained by the fire. A quick search of the house revealed that the back door had been opened and a tunnel had formed in the frigid wall on the other side, leaving the floor inside covered in snow. I've tried to follow Susan's footsteps, but eventually they disappeared behind a solid wall of that curved white snow. I only could imagine her frantically digging through it and the sound of what was above coming down upon her. I tried to dig into it myself in search of her body, but the layer that remained was frozen solid. It was like digging my hand into cement. I knew that Susan could not have survived burning the Christmas gifts and how hard a choice that had been. I opened each one slowly and savored the idea of the children playing for the first time. I could even see Susan standing over them with her camera in hand. She would be giving her biggest smile and snapping away to save each memory. She loved taking pictures, but what I had to do did not need to be captured on any sort of film. I started to feel the numbness that night, that same numbness that overtook Susan earlier that day. It was as cold as the snow that surrounded me, and all I could think was this had been my fault. I should have escaped with my family when I still had the chance. I do not know if it was pride, ignorance, or a little of both, but the guilt was too much. It consumed me and took away everything this holiday was supposed to be about. I started writing this in hopes that someone reads it. I do not know what has happened to the rest of the world, only what has happened to me. I do not know how long I can survive here. My food is running low and I have run out of things to burn. I cannot even say for certain how long I've because my watch stopped running a long time ago. I just want you to know I did not give up. I will try tomorrow, and I wish I had done this sooner. I'm so sorry, Susan, Jacob, and Tommy. You deserve better than this. I hope you can forgive me. Sincerely, Paul Richardson. Written by Locked 334. The Puppet in the Tree by Tapabine. Every elementary school has a ridiculous urban legend. My school had the Muppet Man, and I hated him. Muppet Man was deformed. Ill-fated plastic surgery left him with the ghastly proportions of a marionette puppet. So he stole a rainbow animal costume from the school theater and wore it everywhere he went. He lived in an ancient oak tree in the recess yard. Some kids claimed he lived in the tree, and others claimed he lived in the branches, watching us play from camouflaged hideouts of leaves and twigs. The morbid kids said he lived in the trunk, eating caterpillar larvae and torturing the ghosts of Jason Hughes. Jason Hughes was not an urban legend. Unfortunately, he was just a tragedy, a doomed, anxious wreck cursed with ridiculously outsized glasses and an obsession with drawing. I remember feeling angry one rainy afternoon because I wanted to color with the teacher's new markers. But no, Jason had already used all the paper in the classroom. Nobody liked him much, including myself. But I don't know why. Honestly, he was a sweet kid, fretful, anxious, and a little too smart for his own good, but sweet. Jason disappeared on a November evening when we were in second grade. A few days later, a teacher found his clothes piled at the base of the schoolyard oak tree. The principal called the school assembly to make the announcement. He made it sound like the clothes had been laundered and neatly folded. But my dad, a cop at the time, a cop with the bad habit of telling his kids things nobody should have to know, he told me Jason's clothes were filthy, worse than filthy. completely, in fact, matted with urine, feces, and blood. He told me I could not repeat it to anybody, and I never did. It was too horrifying to even think about, let alone share. That's why I hated Muppet Man. Nobody could say his name without some snot-nosed little shit from behind the tracks saying Jason's a horrifying schoolyard litany. That was another problem. The kids at the school knew Jason was my neighbor, and they knew my dad was a cop. After weeks of hysterical interest, I was abruptly ostracized. It suited me fine over the past couple years. My dad had arrested the parents of at least 2 kids in my class, and they gave me hell for it. It was alright. I preferred books to people anyway, and spent every recess reading under the oak tree. Sometimes I pretended to read Jason's Ghost. Penance, I guess, for treating him so poorly when he was alive. One day in February, I got to school 2 or 3 hours late. I do not remember why. I only remember getting to school and plodding across the empty recess yard. February is a bad month in that particular corner of the world. The sky goes from polished steel in the morning to icy steel in the evening, and at night it dims to a flat, watery darkness that makes my heart ache. The plants are all dead, the trees skeletal except for flourishing colonies of mistletoe. It looks like despair. The empty recess yard was no exception. Everything was gray and pale and somehow seemed brittle, like it would crack and shatter if you touched it. The almost unnatural stillness turned that pale winter fragility into something sinister. Paranoia skirted through me suddenly. What if, just what if it was true? What if the universe was broken? Just what if it actually was true? Of all the rumors and speculations about the tree, what if the scene before me was a fragile husk just waiting for a misplaced step to break it into pieces like thin ice over a lake? I swallowed a surge of panic and took extra care with each step, settling my foot down with excruciating gentleness. Sand crunched under my soles. Everything felt solid, but the sense of glassy fragility persisted. I fought the urge to close my eyes and walked as quickly as I dared. My path took me right past the oak tree. Black, blown glass bark glimmered faintly. Branches threw spiderweb patterns against the grim, steel gray sky. They were bare except for nestled mistletoe. The tree was infested with it. Suddenly, with a disconcerting and painfully abrupt burst of clarity, it occurred to me the tree was dying. I slowed to a halt, staring at it with the kind of hushed reverence you're supposed to feel in church. The tree was scary but beautiful at the same time. I slowed to a halt, staring at it with the kind of hushed reverence you're supposed to feel in church. The tree was scary but beautiful at the same time. More than that, it was a pillar of my memory. It was visible from my backyard, towering over the school and my childhood like a reassuring and eternal sentry. Except it wasn't eternal. It would be gone someday, dead. Maybe before I even left grade school, maybe sooner. My throat felt hot and tight. I took in the sight of the bare branches and Except another brutal, bleak epiphany. There was no wind. The dark mistletoe rustled and writhed like a trapped serpent. Cold air stung my eyes as they widened to see what was happening in front of me. Bright bursts of color flickered inexplicably among the branches, slithering through the mistletoe like a multicolored feather boa, and glittering in that sinuous rope of color. Eyes, glassy round eyes, the color of limes. The rope of color broke into tendrils and grew, not unlike the fungus in which it nestled, overtaking the darkness with eye-wateringly bright, vibrant neon hues. Then they twined back together, warming behind branches and mistletoe before resolving into a fluffy, ridiculously proportioned caricature of an animal, a cartoon incarnate, a Muppet. "Hello," it said. Its voice made me jump, full and hearty and unpleasantly friendly. A cartoon voice. I must be hearing things. My lips started trembling, though tears prickled my eyes, scorching and frigid it all at the same time. I said, "You are not real." "Yes, I am." It fixed me with a sharp, reptilian stare that made me want to scream. I might even be more real than you. The world looked glossier than ever. Clear glass shadowed over my eyes, faded and brittle except for the obscenely bright monstrosity above me. I stamped my foot and held my breath, praying that this thing would shatter, taking the technicolor monster with it. If I broke a broken world, would I break anything at all? But the pavement remained solid. The frozen chill bypassed the soles of my shoes and leached into my feet. The creature stretched and stretched and stretched, slowly snaking its way down the trunk of the tree, simultaneously sloth-like and reptilian, bursting with that ridiculous Crayola fur. It should have been funny. Why wasn't it funny? Why was I so scared? But why wasn't I running away from this? It slid down the bank until its eyes were level with my own. Only really real things, it intoned, can hide themselves in plain sight. Real things like me and Jason Hughes. Your friends call me Muppet Man, and you can too. I stared at it in disbelief as it extended a hand, long and absurdly thin, distorted as if it was coming from a frog's foot, with rainbow fur. This is preposterous. I couldn't be seeing this or hearing this. I turned and ran into the school, screaming all the way. The poor nurse tried to extract the story from me. I don't even remember what I said, but I do remember hiding under their desk and sobbing. Eventually, I finally blubbered the words Muppet Man and Jason. The school went on lockdown. The cops came. My father was not with them. I watched through the window, gagging and crying and trying to forget Muppet Man's bright green eyes. But how could I, with everything else, the oak tree and the police, the nurse and the sky, and my own shaking hands, looked so brittle and faded? Muppet Man was the only vibrant thing, the only bright thing, the only whole thing, the only real thing. Sometime later, maybe a minute, maybe 10 hours for all I can remember, absurd tufts of technicolor fur. Did you do that? The cop demanded. Do what? I screamed. Do what? Did you put that? He pointed to a particularly obscene knot of neon pink fur on this tree. No, I told him over and over again. No, it was Muppet Man that I had seen. I saw Muppet Man. That Muppet Man knew Jason and how he knew me. The nurse sent me home shortly thereafter, and my parents packed me off to my grandparents' house in San Diego that very night. I stayed for 3 weeks, stayed until I stopped having nightmares of Muppet Man eating Jason's bloody, shit-stained clothes while I watched, trapped by his bright eyes like a deer in headlights. I got home on a Wednesday evening. I know it was Wednesday because I remember looking at my mom's calendar, big and glossy and full of beagle puppies. It always made me smile. My parents fed me Burger King ice cream cake, then sent me off to bed. When I pulled my covers back, I froze. Everything around me blanched, turning pale and glassy. Everything except the dirty tufts of neon bright fur on my pillow. On my pillow. My parents assumed I did it and yelled at me for almost an hour, but they let me sleep in their bed anyway. School was a nightmare. I spent the entire morning dreading recess. When the bell rang, I thought about it, throwing a tantrum just to stay in the classroom, but I would get in trouble. My parents would be angry. I would go to the principal's office. I didn't need the chaos. Besides, there would be other kids on the playground, vibrant, living, colorful, nosy kids. All that noise and brightness might be too much for Muppet Man. I told myself these things, but still ran to the bathroom when the bell rang. I threw up, then sat in the stall until a teacher, summoned no doubt by a tattletale, came and told me I had to go outside. I crouched in the corner by the tetherball court as far from the oak tree as I could get. Even from a distance, I thought I caught glimpses of bright fur slithering through the branches. I decided I was just seeing things, that all of this was in my imagination. When the days finally got warmer, steel skies softening to rich blue in the daytime and Easter egg colors at night, bare branches, sprouted buds, flowers growing in the planters, boxes all around the school, I resumed my recess ritual of reading under the tree. Yes, I was cautious at first, but determined. Every adult in my life had me convinced that I was hallucinating. Every kid in the school knew I had a breakdown about Muppet Man. The taunts alone were enough to steel my resolve. Before I knew it, I was reading under the tree like always, the glassy winter horror barely more than a memory. One afternoon in April, something pulled me out of my book. I did not know what it was at first. Maybe the kids screaming on the jungle gym, maybe the 5th grade girls gossiping a few yards away, maybe the warm breeze rustling the leaves. I looked down and gasped. Larvae crawled along my arms, the yellow-white caterpillar worms that lived in the park, the kind all the kids said Muppet Man loved to eat. I ran to the tetherball court, lingered until the bell rang. When I got home that afternoon, I found clusters of neon fur all over my bedroom. I ran to my mother. She lost her temper, marched me into the backyard, and told me to stay out here until she was done cleaning up after me. I finally finished crying. I had settled myself under the apricot tree and got lost in my book. As the afternoon light deepened, rich daylight giving way to copper, something snapped me out of my reverie. I looked down and saw white worms, soft and tiny and somehow wet, in drenching all over my arms. "Hello, hello," I whispered, an unpleasantly friendly voice. "Sorry it's been so long. I guess I've been a bad friend." "I'm crazy," I whispered. I snapped my book shut and closed my eyes. "Crazy, crazy, crazy." Scratchy polyester fur crumpled against my skin. "No, not crazy," Muppet Man said. "Just really real, like me and Jason Hughes." "What are you reading?" He reached out, binding multicolored fur, blazing in the dapple sunlight, and flipped the book over. "Black Beauty. Is it good?" "It's great," I wheezed. I wanted to leap to my feet, wanted to run screaming into my house, but my bones felt watery and frozen at once. I wouldn't be able to stand up, let alone run. Muppet Man brushed the worms off my arm and settled down beside me. His fur made me feel itchy. I didn't look up. I already knew what I would see. The slothy dinosaur face dominated by glassy eyes that would ablaze in the dying sun. I did not want to see him. I was afraid of what would happen if I did. "My mom will see you," I whispered. He patted my arm, fur crunching again. "You should read to me." Tears flooded my eyes. "No." Strong, fuzzy fingers wrapped my wrist. "I want you to read to me." "No." "If you read to me, I will take you to Jason Hughes." I almost scoffed. Jason Hughes with the giant glasses and the keening voice, anxious Jason Hughes who stole all the art paper in the classroom just to draw his stupid fish and stupid beetles. Jason Hughes who'd been reduced to bloody, shit-stained clothes at the base of the schoolyard tree. "Why?" I asked. "Because we're lonely," Muppet Man said. I glanced at the house, praying my mom would look out to see us. If he's lonely, he should go home. He can't. His mom doesn't like him. I pondered this briefly. I thought of my dad, my poor dad, who worked himself to death with overtime, my poor dad who could not catch a break at work. But what if I could help him? What if I could find Jason Hughes and give my dad all the credit? When would I see Jason? It depends, Muppet Man said, "on how well you read." I opened my book to the very first page and began to read aloud. The scrape of the sliding glass door broke my concentration shortly after. I looked up and saw my mom. My heart leapt to my throat. I spun around, hopefully, but Muppet Man was gone. The next morning I found clumps of neon fur in my dresser drawers. It clung to my pants and shirts like lint. At the end of May, I found a note on my windowsill, neatly folded construction paper printed with brightly colored marker. "Come to the school tree tonight at 11. Your friend, Muppet Man." Coarse strands of yellow, pink, and blue hair sprinkled the note. I brushed them off and tucked the paper in my pocket. I wasn't stupid. I knew I could not go alone. I was terrified of Muppet Man, almost as terrified of what my parents would do to me if they caught me sneaking out. So I went to my father. I showed him the note and begged until I wept. He accused me of making it all up for a while, but in the end he agreed to take me to the school at the appointment time. We lived only a few blocks away, so we walked. The evening was unnecessarily cold, almost as cold as the day I first met Muppet Man. I fought back tears the entire way, clutching my father's hand with both of my own. The school gates were locked, of course, but there was a small gate hidden in the passage behind the cafeteria. It had nothing but a single latch. The kids all knew about it, but the adults never did anything. I led my father around the perimeter of the playground. mistletoe infestation. It looked full and healthy, the eternal sentry once more. I stood by the trunk and whispered, "Hello." Something rushed among the leaves overhead. "Hello," came Muppet Man's warm, full voice. "Where's Jason?" The branches rattled and a dark, furry shape slithered down the tree. Glassy eyes caught the light of the moon and blazed. "He's inside me." Muppet Man twisted and stretched down the tree until his eyes were level with mine. No longer was he vibrant or bright. His fur was filthy, caked with mud and sand, and bare, dirty canvas replaced large swaths of once lush neon coat. Of course he was missing fur. He'd been leaving clumps of it all over my room for months. It was a wonder he had any left at all. "What do you mean?" My voice issued a thin, wheezy whine. Muppet Man crept a little closer, holding me captive with his glassy eyes. His long, thin fingers touched his chin, pushed, sliding into his face and pulling it up like a child removing a Halloween mask. My heart thudded, heavy and horrid as a war drum. Enormous glasses glinted in the moonlight, tragically outsized for the decayed little face underneath. Jason Hughes' rotted head was gray and so very fragile, gleaming like clouded glass under the moon. If I touched him, he would shatter. The absurd costume fell to the ground with a whimper. Dull and faded, even the eyes were dead now. The costume was dead. It never had been alive. Jason's empty eye sockets bulged, then broke and splintered apart with a series of soft, papery pops, pops. Something rolled inside, thick and dark and gleaming with the thousand dim lights and colors I could not name. The world flipped in cold playground sand dug into my face. My dad's scream shattered the glassy silence. Perhaps it shattered Jason's poor dead face too. I curled up and lay still as my dad screamed and sirens wailed in the distance. The ruined costume went into an evidence locker. Jason himself was laid to rest several weeks later. They held on to the body as long as they did in order to find out what happened to him. I asked my father about it, but he refused to tell me. I was disappointed but relieved at the same time, and I never tried to find out on my own. I did my best to forget everything and actually came close. I might have managed had my father kept his mouth shut. He has a habit of telling me things I should not know, things nobody should know. I guess it's a personal exorcism, freeing demons that haunt. It's just that the problem with freeing demons is that demons usually go on to haunt someone else. My dad retired a few years ago, but he still has friends on the force. They get together and talk every once in a while. They had one of their visits last night, and one of his friends brought up Jason Hughes. "Did they find the guy who did it?" my dad asked. "No," said his friend. "But the costume, that weird puppet costume, it's not in evidence anymore. It's gone. Did someone take it? Did they accidentally toss it? We don't know." That alone was enough to haunt me forever, but it didn't stop at enough. Demons never stop at enough, if they ever stop at all. I know this because when I got up this morning, I found dirty tufts of neon fur scattered all across my bedroom floor. My Christmas tree is killing me. By human and _Lisette. It's hard to believe that just a week ago, my Christmas tree stood tall and proud in the corner of my living room, bringing me so much joy. Now I find myself wishing this damn tree had never been brought into my home. What few pine needles remained on it are brown, and its trunk is bent over like an inflexible person reaching for their toes. My ornaments have scattered across the floor, but I just don't have the strength to pick them up. I've been feeling really sick these past few days, and unfortunately, it's getting worse. Last week I remembered, as I returned home from work and found a post-it on my door, used your shower, left you a gift, XOXO, Mom, that after they retired at a beautiful trailer park, that they needed to come use my shower and do laundry in the winter. When I opened the door, Rex, my Labrador Retriever, greeted me excitedly. I know, it's a really stereotypical name, but in my defense, I got him when I was 9, and I was all about dinosaurs back then, and I still am. I have an awesome T-Rex magnet on my fridge that isn't going anywhere. Rex, surprisingly spry for his old age, and happy I met his demands for attention, running my hands over his soft black fur. I removed my coat and threw it in the general direction of the nearest hangar. Rex's tail, wagging like a metronome on steroids, dragged me to the living room. I smiled as I saw this beautiful Christmas tree my parents had left me. Rex spread out under the tree on a white blanket that had been draped around it, and playfully nibbled on the bottom branches. The next day I put on some holiday music and dug through boxes to find my ornaments. Rex thought he'd help me by pulling out random objects and hiding them around my house. There is a sweet scent in the air, like nutmeg mixed with candle wax. Little bit odd, but I'm assuming it came from the tree. I had likely failed to close the lid on one of the Christmas candles, as that could have been another explanation. The clumped up sugar in my cupboard was proof of my lazy lid closing ways. Rex was particularly fond of my new garlands and helped me unravel them all over the living room. It took me 15 minutes to undo all of the knots. I often wondered if he really enjoyed watching me struggle. After finding a nice array of older ornaments from my childhood and newer ones I'd bought myself after moving out, I began decorating the tree. I remembered the year when I got Rex. He was sitting underneath the Christmas tree on Christmas Eve wearing a big red bow. We had been friends ever since. As I continued to hang ornaments, I spotted a few yellowing pine needles. I carefully plucked them off and tossed them in the garbage. Their absence did not take away from the tree's splendor. After a while, I noticed Rex wasn't by my side anymore. I looked around my house and found him curled up on his doggy bed, which was pretty unusual in it of itself. I'd only seen him sleep there twice since I'd bought the thing. Rex much preferred the foot of my bed, all tuckered out, huh, boy? I scratching him behind the ear. He whined low, closed his eyes. I'll let him be. He took a few moments to send my parents a thank you email with a photo of the decked out tree, and then started on supper. Before sitting down at the table, I opened a can of Rex's favorite food and poured it in his bowl. I called for him, but he didn't come. Probably exhausted, I thought, from the decathon. I ate alone for the first time in many years. The silence was deafening, but at least I could enjoy the view as I devoured my meal. My tree looked beautiful. I checked on Rex a few minutes later and a few times that evening, but he was fast asleep. Lazy bum. My dad answered my email and told me they were canceling our plans for supper the next day because they had come down with the flu. I gave them strict instructions to get some rest, and they followed my own advice. I was starting to feel rather worn out myself. Over the course of the following days, I saw a steady decline of old Rex's health. I was afraid it was his time. I dreaded it so much that it gave me nightmares. I could barely keep myself from tearing up at work. We've been through so much together, Rex and I. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. I came home one night to find a collection of yellow and brownish pine needles under the tree, starting to thin out like the top of the middle-aged man stopped in my tracks and realized I'd forgotten to greet Rex. I ran to his side and dropped to my knees. I didn't even have time to touch him to know he was gone. My lips quivering and my eyes dripping, I gave him a final hug. I'm so sorry, boy, I wasn't here to say goodbye. I had to call a friend to take care of him. I could not do it myself. The next few days passed in a blur. I was so distraught that I called in sick from work. Honestly, it wasn't a complete lie since I felt like I had caught what was ailing my parents. I emailed my dad to tell him about Rex. He loved that dog as much as I did. He liked to kidnap him for a weekend or long camping trips. He claimed that we shared custody of him, though my parents' laptops were typically at arm's reach. I didn't get a reply. Dad was probably moping around the campfire and needed his space. I cooped up by turning into a complete hermit, leaving the house only once to take out the trash and overflowing recycling bin. I can't remember why the recycling bin was so full. I don't recall putting much stuff into it. Meanwhile, my Christmas tree continued to decay. I was too much of a wreck and too worn down to bother taking it out to the dumpster. I let it slowly rot in my living room. Since yesterday, I've been getting these awful headaches and my nose keeps bleeding. I spent most of my time lying in bed or sitting at my computer. I wished Rex was here. I wish my parents would reply to my emails. I am so lonely. I called the friend who took care of Rex for me, but she couldn't stay on the phone very long. Seems like I gave her my flu. I wish I wasn't looking at my pathetic excuse for a Christmas tree. It's slouched over and there is not a single ornament left on it. Ugh, the screen's getting all blurry. I'm probably going to bed soon. As I was typing this, I heard a faint hissing sound coming from the tree. I lethargically wheeled my chair over and leaned in to listen. It was like the sound of his air escaping from a tire, and it was coming from a tiny black tube sticking out of the trunk. That's when I realized something. The tree had no scent. I should have been able to smell pine or rot or something, anything. Then I remembered why. The recycling bin had been so full. My mind was distracted when I took it out, but it was coming back to me. There had been a large crumpled up cardboard box with a picture of a tree on it. Artificial Christmas trees aren't supposed to die.